This is the Google Pixel 9a, and value per dollar, this is one of the most compelling phones out there right now. At only $499 USD or 679 Canadian, it shares a lot of similarities with the Pixel 9 and is actually better in certain areas, but it does come with some compromises. The question is, how much are you actually giving up with the 9a, and does it even matter? Let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. Phones these days can get insanely expensive. You can easily spend upwards of $1,100 or $1,200 on a flagship model, and the thing is, all these phones are so powerful these days that for most people, a lot of what you get is overkill, and that's where these mid-range devices come in. Phones like the Pixel 9a are a lot more affordable than a true flagship, and while you do get a toned-down version of those higher models, the gap that separates them is getting smaller and smaller, with the most impressive upgrades that I see in a lot of mid-range phones being related to the design. On the Pixel 9a specifically, you've got an aluminum frame with flat edges and rounded corners, a glass front panel, and a plastic back. And comparing it to the last A-series Pixel phone that I reviewed on the channel, which was the 7a, this feels a lot more premium in nature and doesn't really feel like there's much of a drop-off in quality versus the rest of the Pixel 9 series. The one thing that I don't really like as much this year is the color selection with obsidian, porcelain, peony, and iris blue, which is why I've just chosen porcelain or white in the common tongue. The aluminum edges have kind of the same look as the Starlight Apple products, which I really like, and the great thing is it doesn't really show dust or fingerprints at all. Those edges, like the rest of the Pixel 9 series, are a lot more squared off versus previous models, but the rounded corners make it comfortable to hold, and it's average weight for a phone this size, coming in at 186 grams. The 9a also got a major upgrade in water resistance with an IP68 rating, meaning that it now matches most flagship devices, which is great. But the biggest thing that you'll likely notice with the design is that the camera bump is now almost flush with the back, and I know some people don't like that they did away with the camera bump, but I honestly kinda like it. I've been using mine caseless over the last couple of weeks, and having no camera bump means that it doesn't wobble around when I use it flat on my desk, and I just like how minimal it looks. The plastic on the back by no means makes this feel cheap, and on the other side, in my opinion, the display is really what makes this feel like a premium phone. The glass on the front is Gorilla Glass 3, so you've got a good amount of protection there, but this is a 6.3-inch 1080 by 2424 resolution OLED panel, which is up from 6.1 last year. The 9a also does have somewhat thick bezels compared to the rest of the 9 series, which is pretty common for these mid-range phones, but you still get a 120Hz refresh rate with up to 2700 nits peak brightness, which is fantastic. And I don't think that you can really ask for more on a screen from a phone at this price point. Scrolling and animation feel super smooth. Viewing content and gaming is outstanding, and that super high brightness spec is just as good, even better than other flagship phones in some cases, and that makes it great for viewing in bright areas and outdoors in direct sunlight. That screen also has biometrics built in with an in-display optical fingerprint reader and a pinhole camera cutout for face unlock, both of which work well enough. The fingerprint reader isn't quite as accurate as the ultrasonic ones you get with the rest of the 9 series, where occasionally it will miss, but the majority of the time it's quick and responsive, and the same goes with face unlock, where it can struggle in darker settings, but works good as long as you've got a bit of light. That front camera is a 13-megapixel f2.2 aperture, which does match the Pixel 8a and is more than good enough for selfies or video calls, which is all I really use that camera for. But looking at the rear cameras, Google has made some interesting changes. The main camera went from a 64-megapixel sensor in the 8a to 48 in the 9a, and the sensor itself is also smaller, which might seem like a downgrade, but the 9a has a lower aperture at f1.7, meaning that it should be better in lower light scenes, and just testing this out over the last couple of weeks, regardless of the scenario, the results are quite good. In daylight, the Pixel 9a takes well-balanced photos with plenty of detail that do a good job of keeping an image natural looking without boosting up the shadows too much or oversaturating them. On occasion, you might see it flatten out an image too much with HDR, but for a mid-range phone like this, you really can't ask for more, especially with night sight, where images off that lens aren't going to be quite as good as the 9 or the 9 Pro, but are much better than something like the iPhone 16e. Something kind of interesting is that main lens also shoots macro photos this year, where normally you'd see an ultra-wide lens take care of that, which this phone does have, but those come out fairly detailed and sharp, and I personally like the idea of using the main camera for macro shots, as you do get less distortion compared to an ultra-wide lens. The Pixel 9a ultra-wide lens, I would say, is serviceable but not spectacular by any means. That is a 13-megapixel f2.2 sensor that takes decent photos in ideal conditions but is not the sharpest in the world, and it will struggle in dimly lit scenes, but again, I still like that Google at least includes that lens where it's completely absent on the iPhone 16e. On the video side of things, I would say that the functionality is pretty basic, which is fine. You can shoot up to 4K at 60 frames per second, which is what I'd expect on a phone like this, but just be aware that that's only off the main lens, and the ultra-wide can only do 4K 30, and this really leans into electronic stabilization in video mode, which does kind of wreak havoc on the image at night with movement, but in well-lit scenarios, it's totally fine for casual filming. Now, if you're serious about video, I would probably move up to something with a more robust, pro-level camera that has optical stabilization that can maybe record in a log format. But if all you're doing is capturing moments or posting videos on social media for family and friends, that kind of thing, the 9a will do you just fine. Also, if you're someone who likes camera AI tools, you'll get all of Google's built-in camera AI functionality that exists on the rest of the 9 series, like Best Take, Add Me, the Magic Editor and Eraser, image generation, and all that good stuff. For the most part, that all works just as good as the models up from the 9a, and frankly, I rarely ever touch that stuff, but I do use some other AI tools. And there is a slight difference between the Pixel 9a and the rest of the current generation of Pixel phones in that respect. That all boils down to the specs on this phone, where the 9a does come with the same G4 Tensor chip as the models above it, with 128 and 256 gig storage options, but unlike the Pixel 9 and 9 Pro that start at 12 gigs of RAM, the 9a only comes with 8, which really limits the ability to run local AI models on the device. It means to save space, the Pixel 9a essentially has to load AI models into RAM only when they're needed, where on the Pixel 9 and above, they're always running in the background ready to go, which can make things a little slower on the 9a. Local models are also only text-based on the 9a, so you will lose some of the more useful features that you get on the models above it, like the Pixel Screenshots app that will organize screenshots you take and call notes that create summaries of phone conversations. Outside of those things though, things generally behave the same, where Gemini replaces Google Assistant and works well for getting information on the web and adjusting some settings locally. And you do get the new Gemini Live feature where you can have a conversation with Gemini and use your camera to show it what you're talking or asking questions about. That can work okay, but I have found it struggles sometimes when I ask it about products. When I ask what model of speakers that I have at my desk, it's confidently wrong 100% of the time, and it does get confused about my A7 IV camera with a skin on it. At one point it told me it was a GoPro, which is kind of hilarious, but I see it as being more useful if you're out traveling, where maybe you're asking it about landmarks and things of that nature. Beyond AI, the Pixel 9a is running Android 15 with Pixel UI, and the Tensor G4 does a good job of optimizing the software and hardware to work together, which provides a pretty seamless experience with relatively no lag or hangups. Especially with that 120Hz screen, everything feels smooth and fluid, and this phone has great haptics for a mid-range option. But if we're talking about actual measurable performance, there are definitely better phones out there. In Geekbench, single-core scores come in at 1750, where multi-core scores are at 4467, which is nowhere near the iPhone 16e or other mid-rangers like the OnePlus 13 are, but it's still totally fine for most things. Social apps will work fine, watching content and media is smooth, which, by the way, the Pixel 9a does have stereo speakers that get plenty loud with a good amount of clarity and detail, but streaming apps are great, and even more demanding apps like Lightroom work well, as do most games. Regular, less demanding games work completely fine, where more demanding titles can produce a little more lag, so you may have to turn down the settings a little bit in those if possible, and the phone will warm up quite a bit under load with higher than average temperatures, but nothing that I'd be overly concerned with at all. Performance can also be affected by network speeds, and in a general sense, the Pixel 9a has been great in that regard with decent Wi-Fi speeds and okay 5G signal, but there are some things that you should be aware of there. First of all, this does have the same modem as the Pixel 7 and 8, and for those that aren't aware, those really aren't the best modems out there. A lot of folks have complained about poor signal strength on those previous models, and I know a couple people myself who have had intermittent cellular connections in areas with weak signal, so that may be cause for concern if you live in a similar area, but I've personally never had an issue living in a more urban setting. You'll also only get Wi-Fi 6E instead of Wi-Fi 7 that's in the rest of the 9 series. Again, not something that most people will notice, but you do have the matching Bluetooth spec with version 5.3, where I've had absolutely no issues with any of the wireless gear that I've connected to it. As far as wired connectivity goes, you've got a USB-C 3.2 port, so you do get a 5 gigabit per second connection, which is nice to have on a mid-range phone. The iPhone 16e, and a lot of cheaper phones for that matter, still run USB 2 speeds, and the Pixel 9a port is roughly 20 times faster than that, making it a lot more usable for transferring large files or connecting external accessories. That port also supports 23 watt fast charging, which is just a hair lower than the Pixel 9 at 27 watts, and the 9a is actually the largest battery out of any Pixel phone at a whopping 5100 milliamp hours, which is outstanding for a phone this size. If you guys checked out my OnePlus 13 video, you might remember that I made this little app specifically for testing the battery in that phone that looped through a bunch of simulated tasks like web browsing, running a 3D scene, and watching content. And running that same test on the Pixel 9a, it not only beat the Pixel 9 Pro XL, but every device that I've tested. The 9a ran for over 14 hours straight with the screen on the entire time at half brightness with low volume audio, which is pretty crazy. And using it myself with everyday use with a combination of casual use and somewhat resource heavy tasks like photo editing and gaming, I can get just short of 2 days of use on a single charge, which is fantastic. When it does come time to charge, this goes from 0 to 100% in around an hour and a half, and you can charge this wirelessly, although it only does charge at 7.5 watts, so don't expect that to go quickly by any means, and I've also noticed that depending on the charger, the phone can get quite hot. Using the wireless charger in my vehicle, the 9a gets uncomfortably warm, where I would probably worry about the long-term battery health frequently exposing the phone to that much heat, but funny enough, my MagSafe charger seems to work much better where the phone stays a lot cooler for some reason, so if wireless charging is your preferred way to charge, I would probably keep an eye on that. I know it might seem like there's a lot of little things to look out for, but at $499 USD or $679 Canadian, you're definitely going to have to make some sacrifices for a phone that's half the cost of the models above it. But I think that Google has done a fantastic job of picking out the features that really matter with that reduction in cost. Performance, for the most part, is great with the Tensor G4, it takes decent photos, the screen is better than some flagship phones, and the build quality is outstanding. I think value per dollar, this might be the best option out there right now. With that being said, I would love to know what you think. Is there anything about the Pixel 9a that you love, or on the other hand, maybe something that's a deal breaker for you? Let me know in the comments down below. That's all I got for you today. I hope you found this video useful or enjoyable. If you did, feel free to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more tech-related content or help me invent a smart doorbell that quizzes visitors on useless trivia before it rings, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.